What is your take on this? There is a, well, there it is. Run that again, can you? There you go. So, this little segment here, ooh, got some color there now. There we go. Heartstring, she says. Heartstring. The pulling of the heartstring. It's also the pulling of the plug on that. So we'll wait for a moment here. There it is. All righty, great. We'll move on. Your take on this, pulling the heartstring. You know, there are things that we all experience that pull on the heartstring. I hear things like, oh, how cute. That's adorable. I can't take it. I can't take it. You hear those kinds of expressions? You say those kind of things? Puppies and babies, and then babies and puppies together. Those kind of things, and boys and calves and babies and calves and boys together. Of course, you have to be a farmer to enjoy that one right there. Lots of things that are adorable. That one looks a little like Bram, doesn't it? So, all the kinds of stuff that makes you say that. This is so cute. This is adorable. Does Jesus ever enter into that picture? These are a couple of conceptions of the appearance of Jesus. You recognize this one, right? Here. You recognize that one? Rembrandt's Head of Christ, which is rather well known. And how about this one over here? Recognize that one? That's the one that is portrayed as being a more realistic picture of what Jesus probably looked like as a Jew. And you know, Isaiah tells us that he had no comeliness that we should desire him, in talking about a physical appearance. So, conceptions there. Yet, does he ever enter into this that's such adorable? It's just so cute. I want you to know that God has taken effort for us to see Jesus was adored. I want you to turn with me to Psalm 45. We're in a series called Is, Was, Coming, Jesus. We saw a lot of things of what Jesus is in his present day ministry to us. And then as Christmas season has come on, and it is definitely gearing up, we talked about what Jesus was. He was anticipated from the very get-go. We saw in Genesis, the first few chapters, the very get-go of man's fall. The very get-go then, Jesus was identified progressively. We also talked about that he not only was anticipated and identified by following the thread, but he was also envisioned. And here, Jesus is adored. You know, there are several psalms that are part of the Jewish songbook, Songs of Israel. There are several psalms that are called wholly or completely messianic psalms. And what that means is they're all about Jesus. I'm going to tell you these psalms because it'd be kind of good for you during this season to look them up. It's Psalm 2, also Psalm 16, Psalm 22. As a matter of fact, 22, 23, 24 kind of all go together there, but Psalm 22 is clearly all about Jesus. Very clearly, he quoted it when he was right on the cross. And then Psalm 45 that we're looking at here is a psalm about how Jesus was adored. And then Psalm 110 that we saw last week, how he was envisioned. This morning in Psalm 45, I want you to know that straight up, the New Testament tells us this is about Jesus. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, where God is talking about Jesus Christ, he compares him to angels and what God says about angels. And then it says, but about the Son, God says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, your God has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Now, that quote comes from this psalm that you and I are in. And it says here, God is talking, and he is talking about the Son. I want you to start with me, Psalm 45 at verse 2. And it reads like this: You are the most handsome of the sons of men. Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever. Gird your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your splendor and majesty. In your majesty, ride out victoriously for the cause of truth and meekness and righteousness. Let your right hand teach you awesome deeds. Your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The people fall under you. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of your kingdom is the scepter of your righteousness. You've loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. Your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. Daughters of kings are among your ladies of honor. At your right hand stands the queen in gold of Ophir. Hear, O daughter, and consider and incline your ear. This psalm, God tells us straight up in the New Testament, is about the Son. And it is a psalm about adoration. Jesus is adored. And some of these, like the other songs, have images that kind of, whoa. My question: does Jesus pull on your heartstrings for adoration? Whatever he looked like. Does he pull on your heartstrings for adoration? I want you to know that my aim this morning is to go after that adoration so that we go this way. Oh, come, let us. Let us adore him like God intended. Now, I want you to know that this psalm is It's a love psalm. It's a song of love and adoration. And it talks about Jesus descriptively, first of all, descriptively of the King that we're to take and to hold in heart. You know, like we talked about last week as we looked at songs, the book of Psalms was the Jewish song book, and these were written so that they would come up in heart. Both the melody and the words would play over and over and over. And this descriptiveness of the King, King Jesus, is for us to take and hold in heart. Then there is some instructiveness that's given to the one who is the bride. Both in the Old Testament and New Testament, God's people were considered his bride, united to him, to stay with him wherever he goes and whatever he does, for we shall always be with the Lord. The instructiveness that's given here is for us to take to heart. Oh, come. Let us adore him. Let us adore him. Now, I want you to know that though we begin here at verse 2 with descriptiveness of the King, there's actually an introduction that's given to this psalm in verse 1. Look with me at verse 1 of Psalm 45. Verse 1. It reads like this. Now, I want you to look at what is often considered headings. My Bible has a couple of headings here for this psalm. Right above it, in very dark, right above the words or the letters 45, the numbers 45, there is listed, "Your throne, O God, is forever." Now, that's put in by the modern English publishers. The part right under that, which says to the choir master, according to Lilly's, a mescal or a contemplation, a composition, if you would, of the sons of Korah, a love song, that's actually in the Hebrew Bible. That's part of verse 1 in the Hebrew Bible. That's not an inserted heading by the publishers. That's part of the word. These are songs. This is poetry. This is artistry. This is a song. It's a song of love that was composed so that we would adore what God says is of the Son. This is of the Son. And the pulling on the heartstrings is what this is to do. And we're to carry this with us as we go. Do you do that? Do you, going on, find yourself singing daily? You know, the scriptures call us to do that. Sometimes I sing about stuff that's going on here. Baby, it's cold outside. Baby, don't go. And then sometimes it's the songs from here that come to my heart and just pop up. All of a sudden, Lord, reign in me again. This is a song to be doing that. And it goes like this. Verse 1. The person who writes this psalm says, my heart overflows with a good theme. I address my verse to the King. My tongue is like the pen of a ready writer. It's interesting. Well, here, I'm going to borrow something from John Calvin. He's probably a daily friend of yours, right? John Calvin. Been around for a while. When John Calvin wrote on this song, I want you to hear what he said. He said, this thing of overflows, it means boils, it means bubbles up. It denotes the language of the heart, full and ready for utterance. The psalmist's heart was so full and warmed with the subject of the psalm that it could not contain. And the opening of the song envisions it, that it was so for him that he just abruptly breaks forth and he announces the subject. You are the most handsome of all sons of men. His heart just bubbles up. You know, last night when I was thinking on this, putting some things together, we were having dinner. Well, I was having dinner. I was having a little bit ahead of the girls. The girls were having dinner shortly, and they were all in the kitchen. We have a little lunch counter thing in the kitchen, and I was doing that. And the girls, one of the girls was making pasta. And they had angel hair spaghetti that they were putting in. And as I was sitting there, the pot from the heat started to just bubble over and bubble over and bubble over. And that is what he's saying. That's what Calvin identified. That's what the psalmist is saying. The warmth in my heart from this is such that it just bubbles over. It bubbles over with a beautiful, an attractive theme, an adoring theme. That's what those terms are saying. With an adoring topic. And this is it. This is it. My tongue's ready to write, or my hand is ready to write it. It's on my tongue. I'm ready to say it. And he busts forth, like Calvin says, you are the most handsome of all men. Well, now wait a minute here. I thought we just talked about Isaiah, that he, at least the modern day, I mean, in Rembrandt, he looks adorable, but, you know, what? Isaiah says he has no comeliness that we should desire him. There was no physical, whoa. He didn't have it. God didn't give it to him. God could have given it. Just think what God could have made him to look like. You know, you hear of drop dead. Let me tell you, but I want you to know that in his person, there is this beauty. That word handsome that is used there, yafa. It's beauty, it's attractiveness, it's pleasing. And it was talking about in the person of the Messiah, King, Jesus. And this is the beauty. Slide down with me to verses like verse 4. Truth. You're dealing with what's real. What's really the case for us, truth. In your majesty, ride out victoriously for the cause of truth. And gentleness, considering the impact of his words on other people. And he's and righteousness. Your right hand, what you already have in your right hand, will teach you awesome deeds. That's the beauty here. He goes on and he talks about him later, that the scepter, verse 6, the ruling authorization of your kingdom is right. It's righteousness. You love it. And you hate what perverts and destroys. This is the handsomeness that he's talking about. Take and hold this to heart as to his person. You are the most handsome of any man on the earth. You know, there are some people who just have, what do they say? charisma, right? And some of the things I have been exposed to, they say you can learn charisma. I wonder about that. We can learn meekness, gentleness. We can learn to deal with what's real with grace and truth. We can come down on what's right. Charisma and attractiveness above everyone else. You know, the Messiah is what's called perfect. You know what that word means? Perfect? It means that he's complete. He is all put together as a person, balancing justice and mercy, grace and truth, kindness and fairness. He is complete as a person. And he's talked about as being not just perfect, complete, altogether. He's talked about being holy. You know what that word means? It means to be a cut above, to be separated by being a cut above in his justice, in his mercy, in his completeness. This is the attractiveness, the beauty of the Messiah. Oh, come. Let us adore him. And he says this, as to his words, as to his lips, verse 2 says, as to your lips, grace is poured out upon your lips. This is gracious communication. This is communication that it's said, and you just said that so well and so right. We see some of that with Jesus when they were trying to trip him up. Whose image is on the coin? And he said, well, let me see a coin. And you know how it went. It was like, then render unto God the things that are God's, since that's the image of God that you have, and unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. And over and over and over, his words were gracious, the woman in adultery, in the very act, and his interactions with her. You brew of vipers, he calls them. At the same time, you've turned this, my Father's house, into a den of thieves, justice and truth, what's real, and kindness and grace. You know, if somebody was to be elected as a leader, handsome and gracious with words would kind of be the things, right? This is a God-given blessing. Look at the rest of verse 2. Therefore, because God has blessed you forever and ever, God has endowed you with this forever and ever. This is descriptive of the King. This is descriptive of the Lord, our righteousness. And his heart, the psalm writer says, just bubbles over with us. It bubbles over. You know, immediately after saying this, the psalm writer descriptively adds some words about his status. And this is kind of a big section here. As to his status, he begins to talk to him like this. Gird on your sword on your thigh, O mighty one. And then he goes on and he speaks through on this adornment, this adorning words about Jesus. He describes some of these things here as to his status. When we kind of look at this, we are so attracted to beauty. Why is so much money spent on cosmetics? It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's just not for women. Guys I remember my dad always had a whistle and a winkin'. Anybody remember that? Wild Root. Gets him every time. It was a hair thing, tonic that he put on every day. And glasses and clothes and things to adorn. Of course, the adorning, as we have for believers, is not to be merely the outward appearance, braiding of the hair, the putting on of gold, the wearing of fancy clothes, but it's to be the hidden person of the heart. That's what it's to be. And there is a possibility, according to the book of Titus, where we as the followers of Christ can actually adorn the teaching or the doctrine about God. I want you to know where this comes from. Us adorning the truth and the thinking about the whole. It comes from us adoring him, holding in our hearts this descriptiveness of his personality. What is it that makes him handsome? This nature of his words, gracious. This recognition of his status so we don't have to. I want you to know, brothers and sisters, I appeal to you on this, that right now the church is thinking that we need power and we're losing it in our country. And they're angry. People in the church are angry. What are we angry about? Well, you don't know whether to call the wife a him or a her. I want you to know the Messiah King is in charge. And being in charge, he deals with what's real. He deals, verse 4, with what's real in meekness, gentleness, and he does it with what's right. A pastor a number of years ago made a statement here. And he said this. He said, Christians must be reminded that their victories are to come in the same way that the Messiah was. Not by force or by coercion. Whenever the church has succumbed to the use of force as a way of asserting Christian truth and Christian values, as it did in the Middle Ages, it has lost the battle. Did you hear me? When we do, we lose the spiritual battle. Don't succumb. It's all around us. It's an age of anger. And when we act angry because we're losing our values, we're no different. Whenever the church has succumbed to the use of force as a way of asserting Christian truth or values, as it did in the Middle Ages, like with the Crusades, it has lost the spiritual battle and has become like the world, adopting the very evils it opposes. That was James Montgomery Boyce who wrote that. And he wrote it on this psalm right here when he talks about the status of the Messiah. This is it. Verse 4, in your majesty ride out victoriously. You will ride out victoriously for the cause of truth and gentleness and righteousness. Let your right hand teach you these awesome deeds. Your arrows, they are sharp. They're sharp. In your battle here, your arrows are sharp, and they're sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you. That way, righteous, true, gentle. Whew. Do you adore him? We adorn the teaching about God. We adorn it when we adore him and we go with him on this. Handsome, gracious, gentle. Gird on your sword on your thigh, O mighty one, in your splendor and your majesty, truth and gentle and right. Your arrows are sharp. Status. This is who we're dealing with. Verse 6, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter, the authorization of your kingdom, your rule is the scepter of what's right. And you, verse 7, you have loved what's right. And you've hated what gets askewed and maligned. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond all your companions, all of it. This is his status of the mighty one. And our adoration is laid out here for us. I want you to know I'm instructed. I'm instructed. I'm instructed. Just like his right hand will teach these awesome deeds. And I want you to know that people respond to the gentle, to the right, the true, that's done with gracious. How many of you here have had people who get into rough situations suddenly come up and talk to you when they haven't before because they know you're a believer? Had that? Doc Stewart and I were eating lunch this week. Just eating lunch. We just happened to be at the lunchtime at the same time. So we're sitting there, we're talking. And a person that we're in association with comes into the lunchroom, sees us there. She says, I want to ask you guys. And sat down and asked us about her life and death. And I want you to know that it didn't come from being critical of her lifestyle to her face or behind her back or to somebody else or on the social media. All of those like her are just like. It didn't come from that, just like it won't come to you. It'll come from dealing with what's real, holding to what's right, gentle, considering the impact of your words and your actions on the other person. Doc, in responding to her, was so choked with compassion that his voice went to really soft as he asserted the truth. Come, let us adore him. Let us adore him. Status is the mighty one, like this. And at this point, could you advance that for me? As to his presence. Now, to understand this psalm, you have to understand the picture. The picture here is of the king being wedded to his bride. And you have to understand the customs that these Hebrews had. The custom was this: there was the betrothal, and that betrothal was a binding engagement. As a matter of fact, if that engagement was broken as a betrothal, an engagement as we call it, it was the same as a divorce, because divorce had to be issued. There was first the betrothal that was agreed upon by the fathers. And then there was, when the wedding day came, the bridegroom had his friends come over to his house, and the house was made ready, and he went on a journey with his friends to his bride-to-be's parents' house. And he picked her up, and she was there waiting, and she was waiting with her friends, and she was all arrayed waiting for him. Now, that's the picture that we go to here with the procession, because it says this, verse 8, your robes are all fragrant with myrrh and aloes and cassia. From ivory palaces, stringed instruments make you glad. There was the playing of this music. Daughters of the king are among your ladies of honor. These friends that were there. And at your right hand stands the queen, the bride to be in the gold of Ophir. This was the picture of him and his presence. The fragrance of this thing. Have you captured it? The adoration, the handsomeness of his person, the fragrance of myrrh and aloes. And I don't know what cassia smells like, but that too. This is adoration that he's talking of here. Adoration. Now, we have at this point the this instructiveness. Can you take this up? Because this just buzzed in my hand here. And There we go. And take this over, if you would, please. There we go. Instructive to the bride. Because right here, where he meets the queen and stands at the right hand, they're now at her house. There's instruction that's given to the wife to be the bride. Again, you could advance this, please. Here it is. There is her call. Notice this. Hear, O daughter, and consider and incline your ear. He's calling her to take this to heart. The psalm writer, as he talks about the image of Jesus, the Messiah, and his adoration, and I want you to know that the images here get very, very close, very, very tender, very intimate, if you would. The call here is for her to take this to heart. Consider, incline yourself to this. Again, advance it if you would, please. As to her, could you advance that, please? Sorry. Thank you. It didn't go. There it is. As to her position. Now we got two of them here. That's all right. Leave it. As to her position, he says this. As to her position, we kind of gotten out of sequence here. I do need to make a point. As to her call, he says, forget, verse 11. Forget your people. Forget your father's house. Forget it. This is the call to follow Jesus. This is the call to adore the Messiah. This is the call, he says. You have to leave. If anyone come after me, can you finish this? If anyone come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. As a matter of fact, he goes on to say, without this, you cannot be my disciple. He says this as well. I'd like to quote this. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and his sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. This is the adoration for Jesus that he's talking about here. Listen, hear, consider, forget those allegiances. Wow, wait a minute. Hate. I want to repeat this again because it comes like straight out of Luke chapter 14, Jesus talking. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and his mother, his wife and his children, his brothers and his sisters, yes, and even his own life, can't be my follower. Wait a minute. I thought this was a matter of love. Comparison. You understand that? It's comparison. It's comparison to the adoration and the devotion to Christ. In comparison. And he's altogether lovely. This puts her in this position, verse 12. When she follows him, verse 12, the people of Tyre, people who don't understand this, will seek your favor and your gifts. And the riches of the people, they will come seeking these things from you, as we just mentioned. Coming and asking you these questions. And this too, as to her array, she, waiting for the bridegroom to come, is arrayed like this. Look at verse 13. All glorious is the princess in her chamber, with robes interwoven with gold. In many colored robes she is led to the king. and her virgins follow with her. This is her array. This is her appearance before him. Of course, you know, as believers, what we are arrayed in is what God gives us, his righteousness. I want you to think about the Messiah here, and I'm going after adoration for him. I'm going after adoration. That's what I'm doing. And this whole thing, I'm going after adoration, and I'm going after adoration for this purpose, that we will so adore him that we will actually adorn the words going out about God. We will adorn them by words that are true, and they're right, and they're gentle, and they're upright. That's what I'm going after. That we would adore him like that. And understand this array that we have. You know, we will appear before God, all of us. We must all appear before him. Some people will appear at God's great white throne of judgment, and some will appear before the evaluative chair of Christ. We must all appear to give an account for ourselves for what we've done here. And we will appear before him. And when we appear before him, for those who are believers, they will be clothed in the righteousness of Christ. It will surround us. The way that he was right, the way that he was true, the way that he was gentle. This is our array. This is what we will appear in those, what the New Testament calls the robes of righteousness. That's what she's talking about. Her robes, they're gold. They're just beautiful. And she's in these led to the king. Now, Christ always did what was pleasing to the Father. He was always right on it with God. Hey, the question here. Do you always come down where God wants you to be? When you get angry and you handle your anger in a way that is righteous. No, that's what clothes us. If we have our righteousness, that's what clothes us. But God doesn't allow us to appear before him that way because we couldn't do it. He clothes us in Christ's righteousness. Jesus said, I do always those things that are well-pleasing to him. He's always with the Father. And that's what clothes us. Christ's righteousness. That's our garments. That's how we appear before him. He takes our sin debt, that goes to him, and he gives us his always being right on it with God as a free gift. That's what we get. And this is her array before him. And she goes to meet him. She goes on this journey with him back to his house. She goes on this journey. And she goes this way one more time. She goes, and here's her experience as she goes. This is what she's doing. With gladness and joy, they are led along. They are led as they go together and as they enter the palace of the king. And there he ends. This is the instruction to the bride, to the king's wife. This is her call. This is her position. This is her array. This is her to be her experience, the joy and gladness. And you know, we can find this. We can find this. This week I visited Doug. You know, Doug's had a very interesting last 2 weeks. Very interesting. He broke his ankle, and he had wisdom teeth taken out that didn't want to come out, and even the specialist was having a hard time doing it. And in visiting him, I couldn't go last week, so I had to go during the course of the week. I couldn't go last Sunday because he was just not in a place. But going to visit him this week, sitting there, he told me the story, and this too. He told me what he had been doing with God setting this situation up. And he told me of God's provision in it. And he told me of how he had been learning what God had in mind for him. And he told me about some changes that he needed to make in his life. I want you to know that the journey sometimes has some very painful, difficult things that we wouldn't choose. But there is this, in her experience, there is joy and there's gladness. Do you find that? Sometimes I find irkedness in my experience. This irks me. You find that? But when we bring this back here, come let us adore him. He is with us in this journey, building us. These things that irk us are to shape us for eternity and for time. Her experience, that can take you to joy and gladness. Come let us adore him. One more time, guys. In fact, 2 more times. The conclusion of the matter is here. It's in verses 16 and 17. It's this pulling on the heartstring. Notice what he said. In place of your father shall be your sons, and you will make them princes. The words all become masculine here. He begins to direct his words to the king, and he says this, your fathers, the Messiah had fathers, but he has sons, and those sons will be made princes on the earth. They will become rulers. This is what Christ is doing in the lives of his people. Verse 17, I will call your name. I will cause your name to be praised. That's the intent. This is our adoration of him. I will call your name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore, nations will praise you. There's several wills here. What the Lord does is he makes us princes on the earth, all of his people. There is the psalmist and his intent to adore the Lord. I will cause them to remember. And the nations, the people around, I will praise you. Folks, at Christmas time, we have opportunity. Opportunity to get with people, opportunity where there is activities going on, opportunities to have fun and enjoy those things. And the biggest opportunity is to adore him with others. Adore him. Come, let us.